Ooh, it's cold out there. Hey, I'm Brent, and welcome to the great Scholastic Podcastic Holiday Fanfic 2021. You know, we've read some great books this year, and so we've invited a few friends, and we've all written our holiday-themed fan fiction. I hope you like it, and I hope that these stories get told year after year. Enjoy.
Silent Night, Uric Night by Carrie Pulley. My name is Rachel. No last name. This isn't me being a diva, it's me trying to stay alive. By now I've already told you about the Yeerks and their unrelenting plan to enslave every person on the planet. Yeah, even you. They don't care who you are, what you do, where you live, and they definitely don't care about Christmas. The mall was busier than usual, with Christmas only a week away. I had already finished my shopping, never one to get caught buying the cheesy last-minute gifts. A set of soaps? Really? Not on my watch. Not that I need an excuse to visit the mall, but with my shopping already complete, I had a less jolly reason for planting myself in the food court on a Saturday afternoon. Tobias had been keeping an eye on the entrances to the Yeerk pool, giving us an idea of controller activities and recruitment numbers. It clued us into a big increase in underground construction at the mall entrance, but we still didn't know why. So Marco suggested that I, the team's certified mall rat, do some surveillance from the inside. I personally thought that was a rude description of me, but I knew better than to argue against it. I mean, I definitely have the mall layout memorized, and I'll never say no to food court smoothies. So here I was, watching parents frantically shop for toys, and husbands coughing in clouds of perfumes, trying to find a smell their wives would actually like. The speakers played Christmas songs, and trees were lit up on each level. For a second, it felt normal, like how it used to be before our world flipped upside down that night in the construction site. Christmas lights, spaceship lights, lights, they're all just globbed together now. One big weird reality.
Ho, ho, ho! Who wants a picture with Santa?
Bellowed a booming voice from across the food court. I rolled my eyes at the cheesiness, but had to smile when a little girl nearby squealed with excitement. "Daddy, please! Can we see Santa?" she begged the man next to her. He started to reply, but then froze, just for a split second, but long enough for me to see a change in his expression. For just the briefest moment, the dad looked terrified. And then just as quickly, he laughed and said, "Of course, honey, that's why we're here," in an upbeat tone, before walking her over to stand in line at Santa's village. That was weird. Before, when life was normal, I wouldn't have even noticed it. It was so short, just a blip of fear, a twitch of terror. But now, I had seen that before. I knew. Her daddy was a controller, and for just a second, the captive human host had broken through to react to that photo of Santa. But why? What was so scary about the festive North Pole setup, with its jingle bells, jolly elves, and little hut where Santa sat inside? Something didn't feel right. I stood up, threw away my trash, and made my way over to Santa's village. Animatronic reindeer surrounded by a blanket of faux snow, tons of empty boxes wrapped like presents, and a bored teenager wearing elf ears handing out tickets for the photo op. Not as magical as I remembered from when I was little, but so far nothing unusual to see. When the hut's door opened, I could see Santa talking to an older man who looked agitated, his cheeks almost as red as his brightly colored scarf. The door closed. A minute later, it opened again. But Santa was alone now. Where was the angry guy? I didn't see him leave the hut, and that scarf would be impossible to miss. It was a small room, no room to hide anybody. The only explanation was...
Secret door!
Marco exclaimed, looking all too satisfied with himself. I rolled my eyes and replied, "Yes, Marco, that's what I was getting at. I watched that hut for an hour and counted at least 5 people who went in and never came back out." After my stakeout in the mall, we all gathered in Cassie's barn to debrief. Jake sat on an upturned crate, furrowing his brow as he listened. Cassie was next to the animal cages, changing the bandage on a goose with an injured wing. It honked in opposition, ungrateful for her help. Marco was sprawled across a bale of hay, chomping on candy canes and building up to an inevitable sugar high. Tobias was back at the mall, keeping up with the aerial surveillance and probably avoiding the cranky goose. "I believe I require explanation. Is this Santa a formidable warrior on your planet? Is this why humans line up to pay homage to him in the public commerce center?" asked from the corner of the barn. He had morphed into his human form so he could taste, in his words, "an array of your religious festival delicacies." He'd already torn through a bag of peppermint chocolates, a quarter of a fruitcake, not a fan, and was now pouring a big glass of eggnog. "Perhaps we can," he said before taking a drink, and immediately spewed it out all over the ground in front of him. "Excuse me," he choked out. "I was not expecting the density of the liquid. Its thickness overwhelmed me. Additionally, I believe I have inhaled some of this substance into my nasal passage. Is this how it's meant to be consumed?" Marco laughed and told Axe that it's actually a great honor to snort the nog of sugared milk, and that it's considered good luck. Axe was so pleased with this response that none of us tried to correct him. Cassie put the goose back in its cage and returned to the conversation. "So what's behind the secret door? It has to be the Yerks, right?" She looked at Jake, who had still not spoken. The gears in his head were obviously turning, piecing together what little we knew. "We need to get closer," he finally said. "And I think I know how to do it, but it's going to be tricky." Marco snorted and replied sarcastically, "Oh good, I was afraid it would be too easy. That's a load off my mind." Jake laid out the details of his plan, and a few hours later, the wheels were in motion for our surprisingly festive investigation. Is this some sort of comment about my height? Because I'm pretty sure this qualifies as bullying," Marco accused me when I handed him a pair of elf ears to complete his disguise. "Don't read into it, Marco," Cassie tried to assure him. I, on the other hand, silently nodded at him to confirm his suspicion. He's just so easy to tease, I couldn't help myself. "Ah, my ego is wounded. Christmas is ruined," he playfully complained. It was good that he was having fun, because the rest of the gang was dreadfully quiet. Nobody wanted to spend the holiday hunting down Yerks, but we couldn't just ignore what was happening. While Marco finished donning his elf apparel, Cassie and Jake reviewed the plan one last time. "Okay, I'm coming in with Marco as 2 animal handlers. Jake and Rachel, you're on reindeer duty. Axe, you're riding in my pocket as a mouse, and we'll see if we can slip you through the hidden door when it opens. Tobias will be keeping an eye on things from above through the skylight and warning us of any incoming reinforcements if things turn bad." Cassie explained, pulling on her own elf hat and fixing her sweater. She and Marco truly looked like 2 overly enthusiastic seasonal workers, which worked great for the fake petting zoo ruse we'd be using. I'd spotted a flyer for the upcoming reindeer meet and greet at the mall, and then had posed as the manager to cancel the actual group so we could replace them. Honestly, the animal zoo employee I spoken to sounded relieved. I swear I heard him over the phone fending off a disgruntled pig, so he obviously had a lot going on. Acquiring the reindeer DNA was easy given the holiday season. These petting zoos were pretty commonplace this time of year. Jake, Marco, Cassie, and I gathered behind the mall dumpsters while Axe had already found his way into the mall. "Okay, Tobias, keep an eye out while we morph. No surprises, okay?" Jake said to our feathered friend perched on a nearby awning. "You got it, Rudolph," Tobias quipped and flew up to keep watch. I leaned forward as I began to morph. My arms slowly rippled with new layers of fur, spreading to my outstretched fingers, which slowly hardened into thick, dark hooves. As I fell forward and my hooves clopped against the pavement, I felt my face stretch and lengthen. My nostrils deepened and slid to each side of my now prominent muzzle, which was covered in dense whiskers. My chest became taut and burly with muscle and fat, like a barrel strapped across my front. My eyes shifted farther apart and my vision briefly blurred, so I was momentarily shielded from the sight of Marco looking horrified by my erupting antlers. "I'd hate to be on the wrong side of those horns," he remarked, garnering an eye roll from Cassie. "Well, there's still 2 hours for me to make that happen," I taunted as I finished the transformation. Jake was close behind, snorting and shuffling his hooves. "All right, the clock is running. Let's get inside," he directed us. Cassie and Marco took on the roles of animal handlers and led us inside by the reins. Marco grabbed some tinsel from a nearby Christmas tree to drape across my antlers. "I know how much you like to accessorize," he said with a wink. As we entered the crowded center of the mall, I heard children squeal with excitement. Nobody questioned Cassie or Marco as they made a path for Santa's village with us in tow, so the petting zoo swap out must have been successful. "Okay, I can see you down there," Tobias offered from his position on the skylight. "Looks like there's 2 guards on either side of the hut, so I'd say you're onto something." "Axe, what's it like in there? See anything?" Jake called out. "I've been able to evade the large demigod's boots, and I can seal the concealed door, but it hasn't opened yet," Axe replied. Cassie looked confused. "What does he mean, demigod?" Marco smirked and replied, "I may have told him that Santa is an all-powerful being who can bend reality to monitor entire worlds, just to get him into the Christmas spirit." Before any of us could respond to this ridiculous revelation, a chorus of bells rang out from the hut. The head elf, a tired-looking middle-aged woman, announced Santa's impending arrival and held open the hut's door. "Prince Jake, the hidden door is open. I'm entering now," Axe exclaimed from inside. In the commotion of the emerging fat man, nobody noticed a small gray mouse slip through the cracked door. "We were correct. There is a staircase here. I suspect it leads to the pool in Kendrona under this facility." His voice became more faint as he descended deeper into the cavern. If we were right about this, it could only mean one thing. The Uriks were using this festive, joyful setup to lure in and infest families. Sign up for a visit with Santa and end up with an earful of pure evil. "The time is ideal for a diversion, Prince Jake, as this corridor is presently empty," Axe offered up from somewhere far below. It was time to cause a commotion, so Marco and Cassie could sneak into the cavern too. "Okay, Rachel, it's time for these reindeer to run wild," Jake prompted, pawing a hoof at the ground and shaking his furry head free of his loosely tied lead. I shook my own rope off, now unrestrained and ready to incite chaos in the mall. "And go!" Jake yelled, kicking his powerful legs against a giant fiberglass candy cane behind him, cracking it in half. I let loose a long, guttural grunt and plowed through the fake gingerbread picket fence, wielding my massive shoulders like twin battering rams. The guards leapt from their posts in shock, children screamed in surprise, and adults scattered in all directions. Chaos achieved. As the guards darted towards us, hoping to spare their home base from any more destruction, I saw Marco and Cassie flatten themselves into the background and successfully disappear inside the hut and down inside the concealed corridor. There was no turning back now. "On your left," Tobias barked from above, seeking to help us escape the quickly approaching controllers. Jake and I bucked and bashed towards the food court, leading the guards farther away from the now abandoned hut. Santa's cheeks, usually a rosy pink, were rendered deep red with his rage. His Yeerk was irate at this interruption, which made it all the more satisfying when I lowered my head and barreled directly at him. His eyes widened, and he tried to jump over the chair behind him, but my antlers swept him upwards and into an impressive somersault, ending with a sickening thud as his mass met the ground. He screamed in pain as his tailbone yielded to the hard cement landing. Safe to assume I had secured my place on the naughty list. Not for the first time, I thought, and probably not the last either. Double doors straight ahead should lead to the loading docks where you can morph back, Tobias urged us to keep moving. Jake rushed through the displays between us and the door, tallying up an impressive mannequin body count. When we rocketed out the doors and into the sunlight, we could hear police sirens in the distance. "Let's wrap this joyride up, guys. You've got a whole precinct closing in," Tobias warned. Jake and I galloped towards the cover of detached semi-trailers in order to morph back in privacy. The easy part was done. Now it was our turn to descend into the Yeerk pool and hope it wasn't too late to save Christmas. Thanks for joining me. Happy holidays.
Gary Polson's Brian's Christmas by Aaron Beasley. Dedicated to the memory of Gary Polson, May 17th, 1939 to October 13th, 2021. Thanks for inspiring a generation of children to appreciate nature. The following takes place between chapters 16 and 17 in Brian's Winter, published in 1996. Brian snapped awake, cold seeping into his bones. His shelter was pitch dark. Brian panicked his fire had gone out. Fire was life. He frantically tried to unbound himself from the sleeping bag and reached for the survival kit he had retrieved from the plane at the bottom of the lake weeks earlier. He grasped at where it should be, but it wasn't there. No, how could it not be there? His fingers felt stiff, his body shaking uncontrollably. He grasped at the rabbit skin vest that was next to him. There, yes, the only thing that allowed him to survive. He grasped the hilt. It felt cold, but right. He knew it was going to be fine now. Brian pulled the hatchet up. The hatchet his mother had offhandedly given him so many months ago when he first boarded the bush plane that was fated to crash. The thing that kept him alive all this time. He turned the tool so that the backside was facing the flint rock he had built his shelter around, and he struck the rock, remembering how he first made fire. He struck it as hard as he could near his small shelter where the fire had gone cold, just below the 1-foot opening that allowed the smoke to escape. As it struck, sparks flew, but they were not right. Were Brian's eyes deceiving him, he thought? The sparks were red and green. Was he finally losing it? After all this time being alone? Was he hallucinating? He pushed it out of his mind. There's no time. He needed fire. Fire was survival. Fire was his friend. He struck the rock again and again. More red and green sparks flew. Snap! Brian's eyes fluttered as he sat up in his sleeping bag. His fire was still dim red, the embers giving off plenty of heat for his small shelter. The snap that woke him from his anxiety dream was just a tree exploding from the bitter cold just beyond his shelter. Once he thought those sounds were gunshots, but he knew now in the bitter cold of the north trees would just explode, with the moisture expanding. He couldn't help but laugh to himself. He had been so unworried the last couple of weeks, with the meat from the deer that he had shot with his war bow still being plentiful, his routine being so rote. His mind was reminding him that he should be paying attention, always be paying attention. He thought about the dream and the red and green sparks, and the Thanksgiving feast he had had not more than a couple weeks ago. Brian knew that his tracking of time was only an approximation, but decided he would celebrate Christmas today. He set about starting a stew using a large amount of deer meat, then put on his makeshift rabbit moose skins, moccasins, and slipped on his snowshoes. He began to collect wood for his camp, walking along the lake and beyond. He guessed the snow was about 8 to 10 inches deep at this point. He walked, taking in the woods that had become his home. As he turned away from the lake on a slight path, just ahead, 2 wolves trotted by. It had been a few weeks since he had seen them. Brian used to be scared of them, but they never seemed to notice. Though once he stumbled upon them after a kill that had been frightening to see, he saw them as predators. He paused. They glanced in his direction, and then they were on their way. Brian continued collecting wood. Seeing the wolves reminded him of his family. He thought back to the Christmas before, his last Christmas with both of his parents still married. That year, all he wanted was a Panasonic boombox. He remembered eating honey-glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, and green bean casserole. His mom was not the best cook, but her green bean casserole was his favorite. As he remembered the dinner and opening gifts, he realized that both of his parents were not smiling the majority of that holiday. He wondered if they knew then they were getting a divorce. He did get that boombox that he wanted. He was so oblivious then. That world was soft and made him soft and selfish in so many ways. He wondered what it would be like if he was to ever go back with either parent, but quickly pushed that thought out of his head. This was his life now. Brian stopped at a grouping of bushes and stared at it, trying to spot the fool birds. He quickly noticed 3 outlines of the birds that were once so elusive to him. If he had his small bow, he was sure he could have got one. But he was spoiled now with the meat of bigger game, and he had plenty from the deer. He moved towards the bush and they scattered, flying low and fast, then disappeared in various directions. He picked up some of the red berries from the bushes for his Christmas feast. He was so grateful for surviving and being a part of the order of the forest. Brian had enough wood, and the berries were a bonus. He headed back to his shelter. The stew was almost done. He sat near the fire and breathed the cold air slowly. He noticed movement across the way and spotted a porcupine waddling into the forest. Again, Brian smiled as he remembered the run-in with the porcupine that led him to create fire. A gift greater than any boombox could ever be. Brian began cleaning up the campsite when Betty the skunk showed up, raising her tail in Brian's direction. He was surprised as the weather was cold, but so grateful to see Betty the skunk, who holds him up for meat, but also saved him from a bear once. He threw a chunk of deer meat from the stew in the direction of Betty. She smelled it, picked it up, and shuffled off around the shelter to the tall grass, where she disappeared into her burrow. Well, that settled it. It was Christmas if Betty came out in the cold to hold him up for some scraps. Brian finished cleaning up and placed some more wood on the fire and enjoyed the warmth. Brian recalled the moose hump and berry sauce that he had gorged on in celebration of Thanksgiving, giving thanks for being alive, the animals that gave him food, the wood that gave him shelter, firewood, all that he had learned, and the hatchet. He was very grateful for all that, and now he realized that all that happened to him was a gift that changed him. He knew the deer haunch would not be as favorable, but the berries he picked up earlier would make up for that when he mashed them into sauce, as would be the broth. Brian wished he had turtle eggs to go with it. He missed those, but if he survived winter, he would get a chance to eat them again. He went about putting the deer haunch on a stick and slowly cooking it over the open fire. Then he began mashing the berries. Across the lake, something caught Brian's eyes. A moose. It seemed like it was staring at him. He knew it probably wasn't the same moose that attacked him months ago, but for Christmas, he was going to pretend it was. It seemed to nod and slink back into the forest. It was a day with his neighbors, the wolves, foolbirds, porcupine, Betty the skunk, and even the moose that nearly killed him, though probably not. The only neighbor missing would be one of the bears. But better they don't crash this celebration. Brian took the deer haunch off the fire and smeared some of the berry sauce on it, and he took a greasy bite, juice squeezed out. It was delicious. Brian smiled. This was a perfect Christmas in its own way. It was honest, true, and real. Though Brian thought having his Panasonic boombox with him would have made this even better than a perfect. Brian began singing, "We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." In the coming weeks, the weather would warm up to the 30s and 40s, and Brian would come across the dog sled tracks that would lead him to the Cree trapping family's cabin, which he would live with for 3 weeks, before taking a supply plane back to civilization. Brian, of course, would return to those woods many times over the course of his life, but would often look back on his perfect Christmas that year in the winter.